17 minutes. That was how long the quantum core had been screaming before it finally died. Dennis Kowalski heard it from 3 decks away, where he pushed his mop across the observation lounge floor. The sound cut through the metal walls like a wounded animal crying for help. Then silence. The kind of silence that made experienced spacers look up from their work and hold their breath. The lights flickered once. Emergency strips along the corridors switched to dim red. Somewhere far below, in the engineering section, someone was shouting. Dennis wrung out his mop and kept working. He had learned long ago that panic helped nobody. The GCS Starwood Hope was a coalition flagship, home to 4,000 crew members from 18 different species. She patrolled the outer edges of settled space, keeping trade routes safe and responding to distress calls. For 6 years, Dennis had cleaned her floors, fixed her broken fixtures, and stayed invisible to everyone who mattered. That suited him fine. Within the hour, word spread through the ship like fire through dry grass. The quantum core had suffered catastrophic failure. Chief Engineer Pallid, a Morvathi whose crystalline skin usually glowed soft blue, had gone pale gray with stress. The damage was beyond anything in the repair manuals. Dennis made his way down to the engineering deck. Nobody stopped him. Nobody ever stopped the janitor. The engineering bay was chaos controlled by discipline. Morvathi technicians moved between stations, their crystal fingers dancing over holographic displays. Venery officers barked orders in their gurgling language. In the center of it all stood Admiral Yora Thesson, for arms crossed over his chest, his amphibian face tight with fury. And behind them all, visible through reinforced glass, sat the quantum core, or what remained of it. Dennis had seen broken equipment before. 30 years in the Kepler mining belt taught a person what broken looked like. Cracked pressure seals, ruptured fuel lines, twisted metal and melted circuits. He knew broken. This was worse. The crystalline matrix at the heart of the core had fractured in at least a dozen places. Hairline cracks spread across its surface like frozen lightning. The energy that usually pulsed through it in steady waves now sparked and stuttered, each flash weaker than the last. Chief Engineer Pallid approached the Admiral. Dennis edged closer, pretending to sweep debris that had fallen during the initial failure. "The matrix is compromised beyond recovery," Pallid said. His voice resonated through his crystal body, making the words sound like they came from everywhere at once. "I count 17 distinct fracture points. The harmonic frequency is destabilized. Even if we had replacement parts, we lack the precision tools for this kind of repair. Options," Thesson demanded. "We have none, Admiral. The core cannot be fixed." The words hung in the air. Around them, the engineering crew stopped moving. Even the constant hum of the ship seemed to grow quieter. "Life support," Thesson asked. "Battery reserves give us 96 hours. Perhaps 100 if we reduce power to non-essential systems." In the nearest station, Pallid's skin flickered darker. "Coalition Station Mirette. 112 hours at emergency speed." He paused. "Which we cannot achieve without the core." Dennis did the math in his head. They were 16 hours short. 16 hours that might as well be 16 years. Admiral Thesson turned to address his officers. "Send distress signals on all frequencies. Contact any vessel within range. We need rescue or we need parts." "Admiral," Lieutenant Bree spoke up. She was young for a Venery officer, her skin still carrying the greenish tint of recent maturity. "We are deep in the Drift Nebula. Signal interference is significant. Our communications range is reduced by 60%. Then boost the signal. That would require additional power from the core, sir." Thesson's 4 hands clenched into fists. For a moment, Dennis thought the Admiral might strike something. Instead, the Venery officer drew a long breath through his gill slits and forced himself calm. "Do what you can. All of you." The crew returned to their work. Pallid began directing repair attempts that everyone knew would fail. Officers coordinated power distribution. Communication technicians struggled to push signals through the nebula's interference. Dennis kept mopping that he worked his way around the engineering bay, cleaning up coolant spills and scattered debris. His eyes kept returning to the quantum core. to those fractures spreading across its surface, to the way the energy stuttered and sparked. He had seen something like this before. Different technology, smaller scale, but the same basic problem. A crystal matrix falling apart because nobody understood that crystals did not break randomly. They broke along stress lines, and stress lines could be predicted. More importantly, stress lines could be managed that a more Vathi technician bumped into him without apology. Out of the way, maintenance worker. Dennis stepped aside. He was used to being invisible, but he kept watching, kept thinking, kept remembering lessons learned in mining stations where equipment failure meant death and nobody had the luxury of waiting for proper parts. His wife had taught him most of those lessons. She could fix anything with nothing. She used to say that broken was just a puzzle waiting for someone patient enough to solve it. Dennis missed her every single day. Hours passed. Repair attempts failed one after another. Pallid grew more desperate, trying increasingly risky procedures that only made the fractures spread faster. The core dropped to 30% functionality. Then 20. Admiral Thesson stood before the main view screen, watching his ship die around him. Dennis finished mopping the last corner of the engineering bay. He paused beside the observation window, looking at the shattered core. Seen worse in the Kepler mines, he muttered to himself. Nobody heard him. Nobody ever did. But for the first time in 5 years, Dennis Kowalski was thinking about picking up tools instead of a mop. The mess hall had emptied hours ago. Most crew members had returned to their quarters, preparing messages for families they might never see again. The food dispensers hummed quietly in the darkness, serving no one. Dennis sat alone at a corner table, turning a small wrench over and over in his calloused hands. He had carried this tool for 23 years. His wife had given it to him on their first anniversary. She said every good engineer needed a lucky wrench. That he was not sure he believed in luck anymore. But he still carried the wrench. The quantum core's status played on every screen throughout the ship. 18% functionality. Life support holding. Popusing up fine. Estimated time to battery failure. 84 hours. Dennis knew what he had to do. He had known since he first looked at those fractures and recognized the pattern. The question was whether anyone would listen. He found Chief Engineer Pallid in the main engineering bay, surrounded by holographic readouts and failed repair attempts. The Morvathi's crystalline skin had dulled to an exhausted gray. His movements were slow, defeated. Chief Engineer, Dennis said. Pallid did not look up. Maintenance schedules will be suspended until further notice. Focus on essential cleaning only. I'm not here about schedules. I want to talk about the core. That made Pallid turn. His faceted eyes studied Dennis with something between confusion and irritation. What about it? The fractures. They are following the crystal's natural stress lines. If you try to seal them directly, you're fighting the matrix's own structure. That is why your repairs keep failing. Pallid skin flickered with a hint of color. Surprise, maybe, or anger. And how would a janitor know anything about crystalline matrix engineering? I spent 30 years in deep space mining before I took this job. We worked with crystal matrices in the power systems. Smaller scale, but same principles. Smaller scale, Pallid repeated. His voice carried obvious contempt. The quantum core is one of the most sophisticated pieces of technology in the Coalition fleet. It is not comparable to mining equipment. The crystals do not know that, Dennis said. They just know physics. Pallid turned back to his displays. Return to your duties. I have no time for this. Dennis tried to explain further. He talked about bypass methods and stress distribution. He mentioned techniques that miners had developed through necessity, solutions born from desperation when waiting for proper parts meant death. Pallid ignored him completely. Finally, Dennis raised his voice. Chief Engineer, please. I know I can help. What is happening here? Admiral Thesson's voice cut through the engineering bay like a blade. He strode toward them, all four arms rigid with authority. Behind him, several officers followed, including Lieutenant Bree. Nothing of importance, Admiral, Pallid said. The janitor was just leaving. I was trying to offer assistance with the core repair, Dennis said. Thesson's amphibian eyes narrowed. You? The cleaning worker? I have engineering experience, sir. Before I took this position, I worked as a repair specialist on Mining Station Gamma 7. 30 years of keeping equipment running in situations where failure meant immediate death. I believe I can help. The Admiral moved closer. He towered over Dennis, using his height and his 4 arms to create an intimidating presence. Dennis had faced cave-ins and pressure failures and oxygen leaks. He did not step back. Do you have engineering certification from any coalition academy? No, sir. Do you have authorization to work on any critical ship systems? No, sir. Then return to your mop and bucket and let qualified personnel handle this crisis. Thessen's voice rose loud enough for the entire engineering bay to hear. I will not have some human maintenance worker interfering with delicate repair operations because he once fixed a broken drill on some backwater mining rock. Several crew members laughed. Dennis felt his face grow warm, but he held his ground. Admiral, with respect, qualified personnel have spent 12 hours failing to make progress. Let me at least look at the problem. Enough. Thessen pointed toward the exit. Remove yourself from this section immediately. If I see you near the engineering bay again without authorization, you will spend our remaining hours in the brig. Dennis left. What else could he do? He found himself wandering the corridors, mop in hand, not really cleaning anything. Just moving. Just thinking. Wait. Lieutenant Bree caught up with him near the crew quarters. She glanced around to make sure they were alone. What you said back there? About crystal stress lines. You really understand that? Dennis nodded slowly. Mining station power cores used similar technology. Smaller, simpler, but the same basic physics. And you really worked repairs for 30 years. 32, actually. I was chief repair specialist for the last 15. Bree tilted her head, the venery expression for curiosity. Then why are you a janitor now? Dennis was quiet for a long moment. The wrench felt heavy in his pocket. My wife worked with me on Gamma 7. She was the real genius. Could fix anything with anything. He paused, the words difficult. There was an accident. Reactor breach. I got to her too late. Saved 73 other workers that day. But I could not save her. I am sorry. After that, I could not face engineering anymore. Too many memories. So I took a quiet job on a big ship and tried to disappear. He looked at the young officer. But there are 4,000 people on this vessel. I watch people die because I was not fast enough once. I will not watch it happen again because I was too afraid to speak up. Bree was silent, processing this. Before she could respond, the ship's communication system crackled to life. Admiral Thessen's voice filled every corridor. Attention, all crew. This is your admiral speaking. Chief Engineer Pallet has informed me that all repair attempts have failed. The quantum core cannot be restored. We are continuing to send distress signals, but I must be honest with you. Rescue is unlikely. I am ordering all personnel to prepare final messages for transmission to your families. It has been an honor to serve with you. The message ended. Somewhere down the corridor, someone began to cry. Dennis looked at Bree. She looked back at him. Maintenance codes give me access to most areas of the ship, he said quietly. That would be a serious violation of regulations. Yes. Bree drew a slow breath. I will be near engineering section 7 tonight. I probably will not notice if anyone enters through the maintenance tunnels. She walked away without another word. Dennis gripped the lucky wrench in his pocket and made his decision. The maintenance tunnels beneath the engineering deck smelled like recycled air and old coolant. Dennis crawled through them with practiced ease, his tool bag scraping against the narrow walls. He had cleaned these passages dozens of times. He knew every turn, every junction, every access hatched a T0, 300 ship time. The engineering bay was nearly empty. A skeleton crew monitored the dying core while everyone else rested. Preparing for the end, Dennis emerged from a ventilation shaft behind a storage unit. He paused, listening. 2 technicians spoke quietly near the main console, their attention fixed on readouts. Nobody looked toward the shadows where he hid, that he moved to the secondary access point for the quantum core chamber. His maintenance codes opened the door without alarm. The system recognized him as someone who belonged everywhere and nowhere. Invisible, the core chamber was smaller than people imagined. Most of the quantum core's bulk was shielding and cooling systems. The actual crystal matrix sat in the center, no larger than a human torso. It pulsed weakly, each flash of light dimmer than the last. Dennis approached it slowly. He had never worked on anything this advanced, but he had worked on things just as broken. He opened his tool bag. Inside were items he had collected over years of janitorial work. A plasma cutter from engineering surplus, listed as damaged and discarded. Conductive strips salvaged from a broken entertainment console. Thermal compound from the kitchen maintenance supplies, designed for heat management in cooking systems, but chemically identical to industrial grades. And his wife's wrench that he began to work. The crystalline matrix had fractured along 17 points, just as Pallet had reported. But the Morvathi engineer had tried to seal each fracture individually, treating them as separate problems. That approach ignored the fundamental nature of crystal structures. Crystals did not fail randomly. They failed along stress lines created by the original formation process. Try to seal one fracture without addressing the underlying stress, and new fractures would form. It was like trying to stop a river by blocking individual drops of water. Dennis did not try to seal the fractures. Instead, he began building a bypass that, in the Kepler mines, they called this technique bridging. When a crystal power matrix cracked, you did not repair the crystal. You created alternate pathways for the energy to flow, reducing stress on the damaged areas. The crystal would never be perfect again, but it would work. That he stripped conductive material and began laying pathways around the worst fracture points. The thermal compound helped bond the new connections to the crystal surface. The plasma cutter let him make precise adjustments to the matrix housing. Hours passed. Dennis worked in silence, completely focused. "You really are here." He looked up. Lieutenant Bree stood in the doorway, her venery features unreadable. "I told you I would be." "I know. I just was not sure if you meant it." She stepped inside and closed the door. "How is it going?" "Slowly. This crystal matrix is more complex than anything I worked with before. But the principles are the same." Dennis wiped sweat from his forehead. "Are you here to arrest me?" "I am here to watch your back. Security patrol comes through this section every 90 minutes. I will warn you when they approach." Dennis nodded and returned to his work. He carefully laid another conductive bridge. Memories surfaced unbidden. His wife standing beside him in the Gamma 7 repair bay, her hand steady as she guided a plasma torch through damaged circuitry. She had taught him that machines wanted to work, that every piece of broken equipment was just waiting for someone patient enough to understand it. "Broken is just a puzzle you have not solved yet," she used to say. He had stopped solving puzzles after she died, had stopped believing they could be solved. "Can I ask you something?" Bree said quietly. "Go ahead. Why did you leave engineering?" "Really? You obviously love the work." Dennis did not answer immediately. His hands continued their careful movements, placing conductive strips with millimeter precision. "When my wife died, I blamed myself. I was working on another section when the reactor breached. If I had been closer, if I had moved faster, maybe I could have reached her in time." He paused. "The truth is, I probably could not have saved her no matter what. The breach was too severe, but that knowledge did not help. Every time I picked up a tool, I remembered holding her at the end. So I stopped picking up tools." "But you are holding them now." "Yes." Dennis looked at the failing core, at the 4,000 lives it represented. "Some things matter more than my grief." He worked for another hour. The conductive bridges formed a network across the crystal surface, creating alternate pathways for energy flow. The matrix still looked damaged. The fractures still spread across its surface. But now the energy had places to go that did not stress the weakest points. "Patrol incoming." Bree warned. Dennis did not stop. He was close. So close. "Dennis, you need to hide. 2 more minutes. You have 30 seconds. He made the final connection. The last bridge clicked into place. Dennis held his breath. The quantum core pulsed. Once. Twice. Then again, stronger than before. The lights in the chamber brightened. Somewhere in the distance, Dennis heard the ship's ventilation systems increase their output. "What did you do?" Bree stared at the displays. "It is at 40%. That is twice what it was an hour ago. I gave it a path around the damage. It is not fixed. Not really. But it is working. The chamber door opened. Security officers flooded in, weapons raised. Behind them came Chief Engineer Pallid, his crystal skin flashing with alarm colors. What is the meaning of this intrusion? Who authorized? Pallid stopped mid-sentence, staring at his readouts. This is impossible. Arrest this human, the security chief ordered. He has tampered with critical ship systems. Two officers grabbed Dennis's arms. He did not resist. They dragged him toward the door. He looked back at the quantum core. It pulsed steady and strong, each flash brighter than the last. It is working, he said. You might want to check the life support status before you lock me up. Pallid's skin had gone through several color changes, finally settling on a shade Dennis had never seen before. It might have been amazement. It might have been fear. Admiral Thess, and will decide your fate, the security chief growled. Dennis nodded. He had expected nothing less. But as they marched him to the brig, the ship felt more alive around him. The lights burned brighter. The air circulated fresher. And somewhere deep in the engineering bay, a dying heart had started beating again. The brig on the Starwood Hope was designed for comfort rather than punishment. Coalition philosophy held that confinement itself was sufficient deterrent. The cell where Dennis waited had a soft bed, clean facilities, and a viewport showing the swirling colors of the Drift Nebula. He sat on the bed, hands folded, and watched the nebula drift past. 6 hours had passed since his arrest. In that time, the ship had come back to life. Systems that had shut down to conserve power restarted. The emergency lighting gave way to normal illumination. Life support hummed at full capacity. His repairs were holding. For now, the cell door opened. Admiral Thessin entered alone, his 4 arms clasped behind his back. He stood in silence for a long moment, studying Dennis with unreadable amphibian eyes. You disobeyed direct orders, Thessin finally said. Yes, sir. You accessed restricted areas without authorization. Yes, sir. You tampered with the most critical system on my ship. Yes, sir. And somehow, against all logic and probability, you succeeded where my best engineers failed. Thessin moved to the viewport, staring out at the nebula. Explain to me how a janitor understands quantum crystalline technology better than a Morvathi, who has studied it for 2 centuries. Dennis considered his answer carefully. I do not understand it better, Admiral. I probably understand it worse. Chief Engineer Pallid knows more about quantum mechanics than I will ever learn. Then how? Because I was not trying to understand it. I was trying to make it work. Dennis stood, moving to stand beside the Admiral at the viewport. Pallid approaches problems like a scientist. He wants to know why something is broken, what the precise cause is, how to restore it to perfect function. That is valuable, important, but sometimes you do not have time for perfect. Thessin's gill slits fluttered. Go on. In the Kepler mines, we had no supply chains, no replacement parts, no coalition engineers to call for help. When something broke, we fixed it with whatever we had. Our solutions were ugly, inelegant. They made proper engineers wince. Dennis shrugged, but they worked. And working ugly is better than broken beautiful. The Admiral was quiet for a long time. When he spoke again, his voice had lost some of its hard edge. The core is at 40% functionality. Enough for life support, but not propulsion. Chief Engineer Pallid tells me your repairs are holding, but they are crude. Unstable. They could fail at any moment. That is probably accurate. Can you do more? Dennis had been thinking about little else for the past 6 hours. Maybe, if I can get the core to 70%, we might have enough propulsion to reach Mareth Station. But it will require more work, more improvisation. And honestly, Admiral, I am not sure it will hold for the full journey. But it might. It might. Thessin turned to face Dennis directly. His amphibian features were difficult to read, but something had changed in his posture. The rigid military bearing had softened slightly. My officers are demanding punishment. You broke regulations. You endangered the ship. I understand. Do you? Coalition military law requires serious consequences for what you did. I could strip your crew status, confine you for years, have you removed from the ship at the first opportunity. Dennis nodded. He had known the risks when he crawled into that maintenance tunnel. But those 4,000 crew members are still alive because of what you did. Fessen's 4 hands tightened into fists, then slowly relaxed. I have commanded this ship for 8 years. I have never faced a situation where following protocol meant watching my crew die. It is not a feeling I enjoyed. Nobody enjoys that feeling, sir. Tell me about your mining station. About Gamma 7. The request surprised Dennis. He spoke slowly, choosing words with care. It was a deep space operation. 300 workers, mostly humans. We mined rare crystals from an asteroid field. The work was dangerous, but the pay was good. My wife and I spent 15 years there. We thought we would retire there. What happened? Dennis closed his eyes. The memories never faded. Reactor breach. Cascade failure through the cooling system. I was on the far side of the station when it started. Ran as fast as I could. His voice grew quiet. Got 73 people to safety pods. Saved everyone I could reach. But my wife was in the primary engineering section, right next to the breach. By the time I got there, it was too late. Fessin said nothing. He simply waited. I carried her body to the last evac pod, held her the whole way to the rescue ship. And when they finally pried her from my arms, I swore I would never touch another piece of equipment again. Dennis opened his eyes. I thought I meant it. What changed? For 1,000 people, for 1,000 lives, depending on equipment, I know how to fix. Dennis met the Admiral's gaze. I cannot save my wife. Nothing will ever change that. But maybe I can save them. Fessin was silent for a long moment. Then he moved to the cell door. If I release you, can you give us propulsion? Dennis remembered Pallet's analysis. The fractures spreading through the crystal matrix. The makeshift bridges he had constructed. All the ways his repairs could fail. I can try. That is not good enough. Dennis straightened his shoulders. Then it is all I have got. The Admiral studied him for another long moment. Then he reached for the door control. Report to the engineering bay in 15 minutes. I will have Pallet assign you whatever assistance you need. Admiral, do not thank me yet. Fessan paused at the door. If your repairs fail and this ship dies, your name will be recorded as the cause. History will remember you as the janitor who killed 4,000 people. And if they hold, Fessan's amphibian face shifted into what might have been a smile. Then history will wonder how we ever flew without you. He left. The cell door remained open. Dennis took a deep breath. Then he picked up his tool bag and walked toward engineering. There was work to do. Chief Engineer Pallid stood in the quantum core chamber with his crystalline arms crossed. His skin cycled through shades of purple and gray, colors that Dennis had learned to associate with profound discomfort. The Admiral has ordered me to assist you, Pallid said. This does not mean I approve of your methods. I am not asking for approval, Dennis replied. He was already examining the core, noting where his overnight repairs were holding and where they showed signs of strain. I'm asking for help. My help. The Morvathi's skin flickered with surprise. You seemed confident enough to work alone last night. I got lucky last night. The easy parts are done. What comes next is harder, and I cannot do it alone. Dennis turned to face the engineer. You understand this crystal better than I ever will. You know exactly how it is supposed to function. I need that knowledge to build something that actually works. Pallid was silent for a long moment. You realize that what you are doing violates every principle of proper crystalline engineering. Probably. Your bridges create inefficiencies in the energy flow. Power loss of at least 15% compared to optimal function. I know. The thermal compound you used will degrade within 200 hours. These repairs have a limited lifespan. That is why we need to reach Mareth Station. Proper repairs there. Dennis knelt beside the core, pointing to a section where the crystal had fractured particularly badly. But to get there, we need propulsion. And to get propulsion, we need this section working. Pallid moved closer despite himself, his scientific curiosity overcoming his professional objections. The fractures here are too severe. Any attempt to bridge them would require more conductive material than you could safely attach to the crystal surface. What if we did not attach it to the surface? I do not understand. Dennis pulled out a schematic he had sketched during his time in the brig. Mining engineers developed something called deep bridging. Instead of running conductors across the crystal surface, you insert them into the crystal itself, following existing microchannels in the structure. That would require drilling into a functioning quantum matrix. Pallet's skin flashed bright red. The precision needed is beyond any tool we have aboard. Not beyond, just difficult. Dennis handed him the schematic. Your crystal sight can perceive internal structures that human eyes cannot see. If you guide me, I can do the actual work. Pallet studied the diagram for a long time. His skin slowly shifted from alarm red to thoughtful blue. This is insane. Probably. It should not work. A lot of things should not work. They work anyway. Dennis offered his hand. We have 72 hours of life support remaining. Mareth Station is 112 hours away. The math does not favor us. But math never stopped a determined engineer. Pallet stared at the extended hand. Venery shook hands. Morvathi did not. The gesture was purely human. Slowly, the crystal engineer reached out with one faceted hand and gripped Dennis's palm. Tell me what you need. They worked together through the next 12 hours. Pallet's crystal perception let him see deep into the quantum matrix, identifying microchannels that human instruments could not detect. Dennis followed his guidance, carefully inserting conductive threads into pathways that the original engineers never intended to use. Word spread through the ship. The janitor was fixing the core with help from the chief engineer. Crew members found excuses to visit engineering, watching the unlikely partnership through observation windows. Then they started to help that a Venery cook arrived with thermal compound from the kitchen supplies, higher grade than what Dennis had scrounged earlier. A human technician donated conductive wire from his personal electronics collection. A team from maintenance stripped and used panels from storage areas, providing raw materials for additional bridges WY Hour 30. The core reached 50% functionality. We need more power throughput in the secondary channels, Pallet observed. His earlier resentment had faded, replaced by genuine engagement. The current configuration cannot support propulsion. What if we added parallel pathways? Dennis suggested. Instead of one wide channel, multiple narrow ones. That would require. Pallet paused, calculating. Significant additional materials. More than we have. Ask the crew. Lieutenant Bree had been serving as their liaison with the rest of the ship. She sent out a request. Within an hour, crew members arrived with everything from spare communication cables to jewelry made of conductive metals. A Venery officer donated a ceremonial bracelet passed down through 4 generations. My grandmother would approve, she said. She believed in practical solutions. Dennis melted down the bracelet alongside other contributions, forming new conductive threads. The work continued. Y Hour 48. The core reached 62%. We are still short, Dennis admitted. He had been awake for 2 days now, running on caffeine and determination. We need 70% for sustainable propulsion. Pallet consulted his readings. The primary crystal structure is at its limit. We cannot add more bridges without risking cascade failure. Then we need to look elsewhere. Dennis studied the surrounding systems. Cooling apparatus, shielding generators, power regulators. What about the secondary systems? Could we optimize them to reduce the load on the core? The cooling system draws 12% of core output. If we could reduce that, Pallet's skin brightened. Human thermal management techniques. Your species evolved on a world with extreme temperature variations. You have different approaches to heat control. Show me the cooling architecture. They shifted focus. Dennis applied principles he had learned in environments where proper cooling systems were luxuries. Passive heat sinks, radiative surfaces, strategic airflow. The cooling system's power draw dropped from 12% to 7.56. Core functionality at 68%. Almost there, Dennis muttered. His hands shook from exhaustion. His vision blurred at the edges. You need rest, Pallet said. You have been working for over 50 hours. 2 more percent. Just 2 more. Lieutenant Bree arrived with another group of volunteers. They brought scraps, salvage, pieces of their own possessions. Anything that might help. Dennis looked at them. Officers and enlisted personnel. Multiple species, all working toward the same goal. all believing that maybe, just maybe, a janitor could save them. He took a deep breath and got back to work. T-hour 60. The quantum core stabilized at 71% functionality. Propulsion was possible. Admiral Vestan arrived in engineering to find Dennis slumped against a wall, barely conscious. Pallid stood beside the core, monitoring readings with obvious pride. Report, Vestan ordered. 71% functionality, Admiral. Propulsion is available. I estimate we can reach Mareth Station with 14 hours to spare. Vestan looked at Dennis. And him. He needs rest. Badly. Pallid paused. But Admiral, the repairs are not entirely stable. The journey to Mareth will put significant strain on the bypass systems. Someone should monitor the core continuously. I will do it, Dennis said, forcing his eyes open. My repairs. My responsibility. You can barely stand. Dennis pushed himself upright. His legs trembled, but held. I have done worse. Vestan studied him for a long moment. Then he turned to Bree. Get this man food and caffeine. Enough for 40 hours. He looked back at Dennis. You will have company on your watch. I will assign crew members to assist. Admiral, that is an order, Mr. Kowalski. Vestan's amphibian features shifted. One you will obey this time. Understood. Dennis almost smiled. Yes, sir. The journey to Mareth Station began. The quantum core pulsed in steady rhythm. Each flash of light, a heartbeat, keeping 4,000 souls alive. Dennis sat beside it on a crate someone had brought for him, watching readouts that flickered between acceptable and concerning 0.8 hours into the journey. 32 more to go. His body ached in ways he had forgotten were possible. His eyes burned from staring at displays. His hands trembled when he lifted his coffee cup. But he did not leave. Could not leave. The bypass systems he had built were holding. Barely. Every few hours, a connection would start to slip, and Dennis would catch it before it failed. A quick adjustment here. A replacement thread there. The work never stopped. Crew members cycled through engineering in shifts. They brought food, company, conversation. Some sat with Dennis in silence. Others asked questions about mining, about engineering, about Earth. One young Venery enlisted man asked about human music and spent an hour listening to Dennis describe songs he remembered from childhood. Why do humans sing? The young officer asked. Dennis thought about the question. Because sometimes words are not enough. Sometimes you need melody to carry the meaning. That is strange and beautiful. That is humanity. Hour 16. A major connection failed. Dennis saw it on the monitors first. A sudden spike in temperature, a drop in conductivity. He was on his feet before his tired brain fully processed the danger, hands already moving to the affected junction. The conductive thread had burned through. Energy leaked from the bypass, threatening to overload neighboring systems. Dennis grabbed a replacement wire from his dwindling supplies and began emergency repairs. What is happening? Lieutenant Bree had been napping in a corner of engineering. She was beside him in seconds. Cascade failure starting. I need to stop it before it spreads. His hands moved from memory, performing repairs he had done 1,000 times on mining stations. The circumstances were different, but the principles remained. Find a break. Bridge the gap. Restore the flow. 30 seconds. The leak stopped. The cascade failed to cascade. Bree stared at him. How did you do that so fast? Practice. Dennis slumped back on his crate, heart pounding. Lots of practice. Hour 24. Another failure. Another emergency repair. Hour 29. A third. By hour 32. Dennis had replaced nearly a quarter of his original bypass system. His supplies were almost exhausted. His body ran on nothing but willpower and caffeine. Admiral Vestan visited during hour 34. He stood silently for a long time, watching Dennis work. You should rest, the Admiral finally said. Cannot. The core needs watching. Pallid can watch it. Dennis shook his head. Pallid understands the theory. But these repairs are not theory. They're instinct. They're feel. I know when something is about to fail because I can hear it in the hum of the energy flow. Pallid cannot hear that. Not yet. Vestan moved closer. You are killing yourself. Maybe. Dennis adjusted a connection that had started to drift. But I am keeping everyone else alive. That is a trade, I am willing to make." The Admiral said nothing more, but he did not leave either. He pulled up a chair and sat beside Dennis, watching the core pulse. "Tell me about your wife," Vestan said quietly. Dennis was surprised by the request, but talking helped keep him awake. So he told Vestan about meeting her on a supply run to Mars orbital station, about their first date in a zero-gravity restaurant where the soup kept floating away, about the years they spent building a life in the most dangerous places humans could survive. "She was fearless," Dennis said, "not reckless. She understood danger better than anyone I knew, but she never let fear stop her. She said that fear was just information about what mattered enough to risk." "She sounds remarkable." "She was." Dennis watched the core pulse. "I spent 5 years trying to forget her, trying to be invisible, trying not to care about anything enough to risk it. And then your ship started dying, and I realized I had been lying to myself the whole time." "About what?" "About who I am. About who she would have wanted me to be." Dennis finally looked at the Admiral. "She would have been furious at me for hiding. She would have told me that grief is not permission to stop living." Hour 38. The core dropped to 68%. Then 65. Dennis worked frantically, but the damage was spreading faster than he could repair it. Too many bypasses failing at once. Too little material left. "We are losing it," Pallid reported, his voice tight with stress. "Core functionality declining. At this rate, propulsion will fail within 4 hours." For hours. They were still 6 hours from Mareth Station. Dennis stared at the dying core, at the fractures spreading through crystal that was never meant to carry this much burden, at the makeshift bridges that had held far longer than anyone expected. "There is one more thing I could try," he said slowly. "What?" Dennis reached into his pocket and pulled out a wrench. Small, old, worn smooth by decades of use. His wife had given it to him on their first anniversary. His lucky wrench. The only thing he had left of her. The handle was made of conductive alloy. High-grade stuff, better than anything else on the ship. It would make a perfect bridge for the primary junction that was failing. "Dennis," Bree said softly. She had heard enough stories over the past 40 hours to understand what she was looking at. "It is just a tool." His voice cracked. "She would understand. She would want me to use it." He melted down the wrench himself, formed it into conductive threads, installed them in the primary junction with hands that shook not from exhaustion but from something deeper. The core stabilized at 67%. Enough. Just barely enough. Hour 42. The Starwood Hope limped into Mareth Station with 2 hours to spare. Dennis watched through the observation window as station crews attached umbilicals and began emergency repairs. Professional engineers would take over now. Real equipment. Propre technique. Everything he had built would be torn out and replaced. That was fine. His bridges had done their job. Admiral Thessan called a ship-wide assembly in the main hangar. 4,000 crew members gathered, watching their commander approach a podium. 106 hours ago, our quantum core failed. We were told it could not be fixed. We were told to prepare for death. Thessan paused. "We were wrong." He gestured toward Dennis, who stood at the edge of the crowd, trying to stay invisible as always. Dennis Kowalski saved this ship. A janitor with no credentials, no authorization, and no reason to help except that he refused to watch people die. He broke regulations. He defied orders. And he gave us back our lives. The crowd applauded. Dennis felt heat rising to his face. After the assembly, Thessan offered him a position as emergency repair consultant. Full officer rank. Significant pay increase. Recognition for everything he had done. Dennis declined. "I just want to keep my janitor job," he said. "With one change." "Name it." "Access to the engineering bay. Whenever I want. No questions asked." Thessan smiled, an expression that looked strange on his amphibian face. "Granted." Pallid approached as the Admiral left. The Morvathi extended his crystalline hand. "I owe you an apology. And my gratitude." Dennis shook his hand. "You owe me nothing. We fixed it together." "No." Pallid's skin glowed warm gold. "You taught me something important. About engineering. About being wrong." He paused. "About humanity." Days later, The Starwood Hope departed Mareth Station with a fully repaired quantum core. Dennis was back in the corridors with his mop and bucket, cleaning floors and staying invisible. Except he was not invisible anymore. Crew members nodded to him by name. Officers stopped to chat. The young Venery who had asked about music brought him recordings from his home world. Lieutenant Bree found him mopping the engineering deck one evening. "Why did you not take the promotion?" she asked. "You could have been an officer." Dennis dipped his mop in the bucket and kept working. "I did not fix that core for a title. I fixed it because it needed fixing." He paused, looking at the new quantum core humming perfectly behind reinforced glass. Somewhere inside it, invisible to anyone who did not know where to look, a few threads of conductive alloy still remained. The station engineers had kept them as part of the new design. His wife's wrench, transformed into something that would fly between stars for decades to come. "Besides," Dennis said quietly, "someone has to keep these floors clean." He smiled and returned to his work. Outside the observation windows, the universe stretched infinite and dark. And somewhere in the heart of the ship, a janitor watched over everything, ready, if needed, to fix what could not be fixed.